Hello and welcome to Transfermarkt TV. I'm your host Manuel. He's Stefan Bienkowski. First of all, Stefan, how's it going?
Yeah, very, very well indeed. Stuck in the middle of this very busy and very weird January transfer window, which I'm sure we can thank Chelsea for. But yeah, we're not here to talk about Chelsea today. But Manu, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. No, we're not talking about Chelsea today. The big topic today is actually Arsenal. And I'm actually really impressed by Arsenal, Stefan. I think that Chelsea laid them a trap and they are doing everything in their power not to fall into it. With Michailo Mudryk, and he's been a big topic. Chelsea spent a lot of money on a single player, 70 million plus 30 million, a player that Arsenal were also interested in. And, you see this a lot of times with Premier League teams that they then fall in the trap and spend a lot of money on another player, right? A similar amount of money. And they were linked to the likes of Moussa Diaby, who would have probably cost the same. But instead, went out and signed someone like Lucas Trossard for a lot less money from a direct competitor with Brighton in the Premier League, right? A player who already knows the league, who's familiar with the competition there. This is quite a clever signing. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it is. He was linked with a bunch of clubs at the start of the season. If I'm not mistaken, probably Chelsea as well, but perhaps Tottenham mostly, if I'm not mistaken. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think it's kind of been unanimous actually across the board. He has actually been a really impressive signing. He's obviously done very well at Brighton. He did kind of down tools more or less
Mm-hmm.
there, so there's that kind of issue as well. But I think that's just because you obviously expected to make the move to a bigger club, and I think he'll actually prove to be the kind of perfect kind of squad player. He'll add so much depth to a team that has a number of kind of attacking players. No kind of standalone goal scorer since Gabriel Jesus picked up an
Mm-hmm.
injury. I know obviously Nketiah kind of scored against Man United at the weekend. He's done quite well in the games he's played in, but this team kind of revolve around the goals from Martin Odegaard, Bukayo Saka, Martinelli obviously does very well. But I think
Mm-hmm.
most importantly with Trossard, I think what he's shown at Brighton is that he's just very good in these big games. I actually wrote a piece for Transfermarkt, kind of really narrowing in on that. And if you kind of look at his goals and assists in against the top six, he does really, really well. Oddly enough, and perhaps maybe why they signed him, his record against Arsenal was the worst of the against the top six. But we're talking 1.23 goals or assists per 90 against Liverpool, 0.64 against Man
Mm-hmm.
United, etc., etc. He's got a record against all top six since moving to the Premier League of 0.6 goals and assists per 90. So we're talking about a really elite player who seems to really stand out in the big games. And I think that's kind of what Arsenal will really need in the second half of the season. We've obviously saw them do very well against Man United. They've done really well against most of the top six this season, but they haven't played Man City yet. They haven't played Pep Guardiola's side because the first half, or their fixture in the first half of the season was postponed. And they'll basically have this double bill against them between now and May. And not only will Arsenal need more goal scorers and more depth in attack, but they'll also kind of specifically need players who are Premier League proven and know how to score goals in big games. And I think that's kind of what Trossard offers. And because his contract was expiring at Brighton, they managed to pick him up for an absolute bargain if you consider what Chelsea spent on Mudryk, or as you mentioned,
Yeah.
how much they would have probably had to spend on someone like Moussa Diaby. So I think it's a really smart signing. I think he can kind of step into that team and make an immediate difference to help them kind of push on in this title challenge.
Yeah, I think it's really impressive how quickly they pivoted from one target to another. And that is not to say that they're not going to go back to players like Moussa Diaby, right? But I think they needed something immediately and they got it. And they got it from a club that has done, I think, really well in the Premier Leagues. Brighton is turning into this kind of talent factory for the top six sides, isn't it? And yeah, I think I personally think I'm really impressed with Arsenal signings overall. When you look at their investment, yes, it's 181 million euros this window. Sorry, this entire season. But that's very little in comparison to some of the other teams around them, right? Especially Chelsea, who are now probably going to break the 500 million euro mark, which is just incredibly insane, even for Premier League standards. But Stefan, it's not just Lucas Trossard, the other player that they signed, and this defender, relatively unknown, and I'm sorry, I'm looking at my second screen here, is Jakub Kiwior from Spezia. He's a 22-year-old Polish centre back, part of the national team. This is another guy where you look at Arsenal and say they had a need. They needed to sign a player with upside. Kiwior is still very young, right? And they didn't necessarily want to break the bank. And so where Chelsea went for someone like Benoit Badiashvili from Monaco, right? Paid a lot of money, signed him to, I think, a 7-year contract. Arsenal went for a relatively unknown route. And yet I think this is a transfer that potentially, like Trossard, could be a huge upside win situation for them.
Yeah, absolutely. From the kind of people I've seen who cover Italian football said that the transfer fees perhaps a little high, but as we all know, in this day and age, Premier League teams pay a premium on players that they sign from elsewhere in Europe, and of course they're paying into that kind of potential, and it looks like he has got bags and bags of potential. But I also think, like Trossard, he's actually a player who could end up playing a very immediate role in this team. And the reason I say that is that if you look at the kind of minutes that Man United, that Arsenal's defenders have been picking up this season, it really points to a team that have been excessively relying on key players, key defenders in particular. You know, Arteta doesn't have a squad as big as even Man United, or nowhere near as big as Manchester City, and certainly not as big as Chelsea, who've just basically signed another entire start 11 this season. But if you kind of look at the minutes that those three kind of central defenders in particular, Gabriel, William Saliba, and Ben White. I know Ben White kind of plays right back more often than not, but we still kind of included him there. 3 of them are in the top 20 in the Premier League for central defenders who've picked up the most minutes in the league this season. And if you actually compare that to Manchester City's 3 key defenders, Manu Akanji, John Stones, and Nathan Ake, who are 32nd, 33rd, and 41st, for minutes played between central defenders in the league this season, there's a chasm between how heavy those legs must be feeling right now. And if you kind of take the average between those 6 defenders and you kind of break it down into what the difference is, it comes out about 493 minutes on average that the Arsenal players have played more than Man City, which, if you think about it, we're only halfway through a season, but that really kind of breaks down to Gabriel, Saliba, and White playing 5.5 more league games than Akanji, Stones, and Ake. This is just in the league. We're not even talking about FA Cup, League Cup, Champions League. And even though, you know, I'm not suggesting that Gabriel, Saliba, or Ben White are looking tired right now, far from it. But as we know, you know, these league campaigns, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And even though Arsenal do have other defenders in that team, bringing in someone like Kiwior offers them more kind of options in defence. And I really wouldn't be surprised to see him pick up more game time between now and the end of the season, because it's going to get to a point, especially when the games come in thick and fast, especially against these 2 games against Manchester City, that Arsenal are going to start picking up injuries. These players are going to start looking jaded, and Arteta's going to have to start rotating their squad. I think he has kind of held off as long as he can, because he just kind of wants to keep the momentum going. He wants to keep playing players while they're winning games, but he will eventually have to start relying on these backup players in this Arsenal squad. And to have had this kind of young, exciting central defenders having a really good breakout season in Serie A, then, you know, he's obviously going to be full of confidence, and he can kind of step into that team and hopefully offer something and help them continue this kind of momentum going forward into the second half of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what Arsenal have been doing has been nothing short of impressive, right? But we are only at the halfway point of the season. Man City are still very much in this race, have 2 games directly against Arsenal. I think that is going to make or break this title challenge for Arsenal. And yes, 19 more games to go, 18 more games to go for Arsenal in this league campaign. And I think you need fresh legs at some point. So I think I'm really impressed by the way they have acted in this transfer window, and I don't think they're quite 100% done yet from now until Tuesday when the window shuts. So Arsenal, a really interesting story. I think the way they've acted in the transfer window has been very clever. They're not falling into the trap set by the competition, and yeah, it's a big story to follow for the rest of the year. Stefan, I think that pretty much wraps it up, right? We'll be back with more content very soon. Until then, cheers and bye-bye.